I went to my fiancée's first art exhibition, the one I sponsored. Around the corner, I saw her kissing her ex. She saw me and said, "Thanks for the support. We're breaking up." That's when I exploded in. I paid for the exhibition because I believed in it, and because I believed in her. Those two things felt inseparable at the time. Rebecca had spent years talking about this moment in half-finished thoughts and anxious late-night conversations, always circling the same fear that no one would ever take her seriously. I told her that talent without opportunity was just wasted time, and opportunity was something I could help with. I meant it in the most practical way possible. I was not trying to buy success or control anything. I was trying to remove friction so she could finally stand on a clean stage. The venue was not cheap. It was a renovated industrial gallery on the east side of the city, the kind that looked raw on purpose and charged extra for the aesthetic. I covered the rental, the lighting technician, the installation crew, the printed catalogs, and the opening reception. I paid for professional framing, transport insurance, and a small promotional push that got local critics to agree to attend. My name appeared on the sponsorship agreement, but Rebecca insisted it stay off the wall placards. She said the work should speak for itself. I agreed because it sounded principled, and because I trusted her. Opening night arrived faster than expected. The gallery filled steadily, coats stacked at the entrance, wine glasses clinking softly as people leaned in toward the canvases. Rebecca moved through the space with practiced nervous energy, smiling, explaining, nodding, absorbing validation like oxygen. Watching her that night felt like watching someone finally step into the shape of themselves. I stood back and let her have the room. I did not want to hover or insert myself into something that was supposed to be hers. About 40 minutes in, my phone vibrated. The bank confirmation for the final vendor payment had not gone through, and the event coordinator wanted clarification. I stepped away from the main hall, weaving past a temporary partition that led toward a storage corridor used by staff. The noise dropped off sharply there, replaced by the hum of electrical equipment and muffled voices. I rounded the corner without thinking, already composing an answer in my head. That was when I saw them. Rebecca was pressed against the wall, her hand curled into the back of a man's jacket. His face was turned slightly, familiar in a way that took a second too long to register. Lucas. The ex she said she barely spoke to anymore. The one she described as immature, unreliable, part of an old life she had outgrown. Their mouths were not brushing or hesitating. There was no confusion in their body language. It was intimate, practiced, and unhidden in its intent. For a brief moment, none of us moved. Rebecca pulled back first. She did not look startled. Her expression shifted, but not into guilt or fear. It was closer to calculation. Lucas glanced at me, his posture tightening, then stepped back as if this was inconvenient rather than catastrophic. Rebecca straightened her dress and smoothed it down with deliberate calm. She thanked me for everything I had done for her and said that the relationship was over. The words landed flat, delivered like administrative closure. There was no apology embedded in them, no hesitation, no attempt to soften the impact. It was presented as a completed decision, not a confession. Something inside me snapped open instead of breaking cleanly. The shock gave way to heat. I remember my voice rising, though I do not remember exactly what I said. The corridor amplified everything. Someone from the staff glanced over. A nearby guest slowed, sensing tension. Lucas retreated further down the hall, disappearing through a side door without saying a word. Rebecca did not follow him. She stayed where she was, composed, almost relieved. She told me this was not the place to discuss personal matters, as if the betrayal had not occurred 10 seconds earlier. That sentence alone drew more attention than my raised voice ever could have. Security appeared quickly, alerted by the disturbance. One of them recognized Rebecca and hesitated, unsure who was the problem. I was asked to step aside. The word escort hovered in the air without being spoken. Guests pretended not to watch while absolutely watching. I left the gallery without saying goodbye to anyone. Outside, the night air felt thin and sharp. My hands shook as I sat in the car, staring at the illuminated sign bearing Rebecca's name. The irony settled slowly. I had paid for every light illuminating her work, every glass of wine being poured in her honor, every printed word praising her vision. Inside, people were celebrating something that had just collapsed for me in the most direct way possible. The drive home passed in fragments. I replayed conversations from the past year with new weight. The late nights when Rebecca said she needed space to work. The sudden defensiveness whenever Lucas's name came up. The insistence on handling communication with vendors herself. None of it had felt alarming at the time. It had felt like ambition. At home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the sponsorship documents. I had not intended to start investigating anything that night. I only wanted distance from the images replaying in my head. Still, once the files were open, I noticed things I had not paid attention to before. Invoices forwarded instead of issued directly. Payment requests with vague descriptions. A marketing agreement that credited Rebecca alone as the primary financier of the exhibition's production. I checked my email. There were messages from the gallery coordinator thanking Rebecca for her generosity and leadership. My name appeared nowhere in the thread. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca appeared, asking me not to make a scene and reminding me that tonight was important for her career. That framing did something irreversible to my perception of her. The betrayal itself was painful, but the way it was contextualized as an inconvenience was worse. I did not respond. I forwarded the bank confirmation request to myself and flagged it. The night was no longer about emotion alone. Something structural had shifted. I was no longer standing inside a personal collapse. I was standing at the edge of a professional one that I had unknowingly funded. Later, I learned that several guests had noticed the tension. People talked. They always do. By the end of the night, whispers were already threading through the room, speculative and half-informed. Rebecca continued smiling through it, holding her glass steady, explaining her work as if nothing had happened. From my apartment window, the city lights looked indifferent. I realized that what hurt most was not the end of the relationship, but the precision with which it ended. It had been timed, placed, and delivered in a way that left me isolated and publicly diminished. The support I gave had been accepted fully. The person who accepted it had already decided I was disposable. That was the moment I understood that this was not an accident or a lapse in judgment. It was a choice that had been waiting for the right backdrop, and I had paid for the backdrop myself. The morning after the exhibition opened, the city felt unchanged in a way that was almost insulting. Traffic moved on schedule. Cafes opened their doors. People discussed plans that assumed stability. For me, the night had not ended. It had simply gone quiet, like a machine still running behind a wall. I started with what I knew. I opened my laptop and created a separate folder, not because I planned anything dramatic, but because my instinct told me that the documents connected to the exhibition needed to be isolated from everything else. I downloaded contracts, invoices, emails, and bank confirmations. The more I gathered, the clearer it became that I had never truly seen the full structure of what I had paid for. The sponsorship agreement listed me as the financial guarantor, not the primary sponsor. That distinction mattered. It meant my money underwrote the exhibition, but the public credit belonged elsewhere. I had agreed to this months earlier without much thought, trusting Rebecca's explanation that visibility mattered more than ego. Seeing it now, stripped of sentiment, it looked different. It looked intentional. I cross-checked invoices against my payment history. Several charges stood out immediately. Transport fees that exceeded the quoted estimate. Installation costs billed twice under slightly different descriptions. A consulting fee paid to a third party I did not recognize. The name on that invoice stopped me cold. Lucas Reed Consulting. I searched through older emails and found a message Rebecca had forwarded months ago, introducing Lucas as someone helping her navigate the business side of the art world. At the time, she framed it as a temporary favor, nothing formal. The invoice suggested otherwise. The consulting fee was not small. It was structured as a percentage tied to projected sales. I called the gallery. Not angrily, not accusingly. I asked questions the way someone asks when they already suspect the answer will not help them. The coordinator sounded cautious, polite, and increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation went on. She confirmed that all communication regarding payments, scheduling, and promotion had come from Rebecca directly. She also confirmed that Lucas had been present during several planning meetings, introduced as Rebecca's representative. When I asked why my name did not appear in any promotional materials, the coordinator hesitated before explaining that Rebecca had requested full creative and financial credit to strengthen her professional narrative. The gallery had no reason to object. From their perspective, the money arrived on time and the artist appeared organized and committed. I thanked her and ended the call. The realization settled slowly. I had not simply been a supportive partner. I had been positioned as infrastructure. Necessary, invisible, and replaceable once the structure stood on its own. By midday, my phone was full of missed calls and messages from Rebecca. I did not answer them. Each notification felt less like communication and more like pressure. Instead, I contacted my bank and asked for a temporary freeze on any pending exhibition-related transactions that had not yet cleared. The representative confirmed there was one remaining promotional payment scheduled for release in 48 hours. I asked for it to be paused pending review. That afternoon, I met with a friend who worked adjacent to the art scene, someone who knew the rhythms and politics of small galleries. I did not frame the conversation emotionally. I laid out the facts and asked whether what I was seeing was unusual. He listened carefully, then told me something that made my stomach tighten. Several of the pieces in the exhibition had been circulating privately years earlier under different attribution. Not sold, but shown informally. He had seen images online tied to Lucas's earlier projects, collaborative efforts that never fully launched. The style matched. The themes aligned too closely to ignore. At the time, the work was described as experimental and unfocused. Now it was being praised as cohesive and mature. The implication was clear. Authorship, at best, was shared. At worst, it was misrepresented. That evening, Rebecca showed up at my apartment unannounced. I did not let her in. She spoke through the door, her voice controlled, careful. She accused me of overreacting, of turning a personal issue into a professional vendetta. She insisted Lucas's involvement had been minimal and that my support was appreciated, even if the relationship had run its course. I told her the remaining funds were frozen and that I was reviewing the agreements. The silence on the other side of the door lasted long enough to feel calculated. When she spoke again, her tone changed. She warned me that withdrawing support would make me look unstable and vindictive. She reminded me that people were watching. That word stuck with me. Watching. It confirmed what I had already begun to understand. This was no longer a private matter. It was a reputational battlefield, and she believed she held the narrative advantage. The next day, the gallery board requested a meeting. The pause in payments had triggered internal questions. I brought documentation. I did not editorialize. I showed timelines, invoices, and correspondence. I explained my role and clarified that I had never consented to misrepresentation of sponsorship or authorship. The board listened closely. They asked about Lucas. I explained his financial involvement and personal relationship with the artist. The room shifted. Conflicts of interest were not abstract concerns to people whose credibility depended on transparency. By the end of the meeting, the board informed me they would initiate a formal review. Sales would be temporarily suspended. Promotional activities would be scaled back, pending clarification. They framed it as due diligence, not accusation, but the effect was immediate. That afternoon, Rebecca called again. This time, she was not calm. She accused me of sabotaging her career. She said the timing was cruel. She said I knew how much this mattered to her. I reminded her that she had chosen the timing when she ended our relationship in the corridor of the gallery. She ended the call abruptly. Within hours, word spread. Collectors hesitated. A scheduled review piece was postponed. Social media chatter shifted from praise to speculation. The exhibition space itself seemed to change tone, its energy dampened by uncertainty. Lucas attempted to intervene. He emailed the gallery asserting his role as consultant and denying any impropriety. The board requested documentation of his authority. None was provided. By the end of the day, the exhibition that had opened with confidence was operating under a cloud. Rebecca remained publicly composed, but her private messages grew erratic. She alternated between apology and accusation, between appeals to loyalty and threats of reputational damage. I did not engage. I had learned that responding emotionally only strengthened her position. Silence, backed by facts, did more damage than confrontation ever could. That night, I sat at my desk and closed the folder I had created the day before. The contents were no longer chaotic. They told a story with a clear through line. Support had been accepted under one premise and used under another. Personal trust had been leveraged into professional advantage. The betrayal was no longer limited to a kiss in a corridor. It had shape, documentation, and witnesses. It had consequences that were beginning to unfold whether anyone wanted them to or not. The exhibition lights were still on. The art still hung on the walls. People still walked through the space and tried to enjoy what they saw. But the foundation underneath it had cracked, and everyone could feel it. By the third day after the opening, the exhibition was no longer an event. It was a situation. The gallery did not announce the review publicly at first. They framed it internally as a procedural pause, a standard response to irregularities. That framing lasted less than 24 hours. In an industry that survives on perception, silence functions like confirmation. Collectors noticed immediately when sales inquiries stalled. Critics noticed when scheduled walkthroughs were postponed. Artists noticed when staff conversations lowered in volume every time Rebecca entered the room. I was not present when the gallery doors opened that morning, but I did not need to be. Messages reached me from people I had never met, acquaintances of acquaintances who wanted clarification. Some assumed I had pulled funding out of spite. Others assumed the exhibition was already finished. A few asked directly whether the work was legitimate. I answered none of them. The gallery board requested additional documentation from Rebecca and Lucas by midday. Proof of authorship. Proof of financial transparency. Proof of authority. These were not accusations. They were requirements. Rebecca provided partial responses that created more questions than they resolved. Lucas provided nothing substantial at all. By the afternoon, the gallery coordinator informed Rebecca that Lucas would no longer be permitted on-site during business hours. His role was unofficial, his authority unverified, and his presence had become a liability. The decision was framed as temporary. Everyone involved knew it was not. Lucas reacted poorly. He arrived anyway, attempted to argue with staff, and was escorted out in front of several visitors. Phones came out. Someone recorded part of the exchange. That clip did not go viral, but it circulated enough to harden existing speculation into assumption. Rebecca attempted to maintain control of the space. She stayed longer than usual, repositioned herself near key pieces, and spoke at length to anyone who lingered. Her explanations grew more elaborate. Each version of events shifted slightly from the last. That inconsistency did not go unnoticed. The press interest followed a predictable pattern. A local blog published a vague piece about an exhibition paused amid sponsorship disputes. A regional outlet followed up with questions about authorship and financial ethics. No names were officially accused, but enough details were included to make anonymity meaningless. I was contacted for comment. I declined. The gallery issued a statement confirming an internal review and temporary suspension of sales. They emphasized their commitment to ethical standards. That single paragraph did more damage than any accusation could have. It reframed the exhibition from celebration to cautionary example. Collectors began pulling back quietly. Not dramatically, just enough to signal concern. Emails that once requested pricing now requested clarification. Some asked whether refunds would be issued if disputes escalated. The gallery stopped accepting deposits entirely. Rebecca's tone shifted again. She began framing herself as a victim of personal conflict spilling into professional space. She suggested my involvement was motivated by resentment. She implied emotional instability without naming it directly. That narrative might have worked if documentation had not existed. The board asked me to attend a second meeting. This time, legal counsel was present. I laid out my involvement chronologically. Dates, transfers, agreements. I explained what I believed I was funding and how those funds were used. I made no statements about motive or intent. Facts did not require interpretation. The contrast between my presentation and Rebecca's submissions was stark. One was consistent. The other was reactive. By the end of the meeting, the board informed both parties that the exhibition would be closed early. The decision was framed as mutual agreement to prevent further reputational harm. That phrasing was generous. The reality was simpler. The gallery could not afford to continue hosting work under active dispute. The closure was not announced with fanfare. It appeared quietly on the gallery's website as a scheduling update. Visitors who arrived that evening were met with locked doors and a small printed notice. Some lingered outside, confused. Others took photos. Rebecca learned of the closure less than an hour before it happened. She arrived at the gallery visibly shaken. Staff allowed her limited access to remove personal items. She moved through the space quickly, avoiding eye contact. The work remained on the walls. Removing it would have required acknowledgement. Lucas did not return. Within 48 hours, the fallout expanded outward. Other galleries canceled meetings Rebecca had scheduled. A residency application she had submitted weeks earlier was marked under review. Collaborators distanced themselves without explanation. Invitations dried up. The narrative hardened. Not into a clean story, but into something worse. Ambiguity. People did not know exactly what happened, only that something was wrong. In creative industries, that kind of uncertainty lingers longer than scandal. Rebecca attempted to contact me repeatedly. The messages shifted from anger to desperation. She asked me to reconsider. She suggested mediation. She warned me that dragging this out would harm everyone involved. She implied I still had power to fix it. She was right about one thing. I did have power, but not the kind she imagined. The gallery's legal counsel contacted me regarding potential recovery of misused funds. They framed it as an option, not a demand. The consulting fees paid to Lucas were under scrutiny. The board wanted to know whether I intended to pursue reimbursement. I told them I wanted transparency first. I wanted the truth documented, not buried under settlements. That answer surprised them. The next week unfolded slowly and all at once. Rebecca's online presence changed tone. Promotional posts disappeared. Comments were disabled. Her artist bio was updated to remove references to the exhibition. Lucas deleted several accounts entirely. I attended no events. I made no public statements. People filled the silence with their own conclusions. Some were generous. Many were not. What struck me most was how quickly celebration turned to avoidance. People who had praised the work days earlier now spoke about it in the past tense. The art itself had not changed. The context had. By the end of the week, the exhibition existed only as a memory and a problem. The gallery moved on. They always do. Their survival depends on it. Rebecca did not. The relationship had ended in a corridor with a kiss meant for someone else. The professional collapse unfolded in full view, shaped by decisions made long before that night. I realized then that the explosion everyone expected had already happened. It just did not look like shouting or spectacle. It looked like doors closing quietly, one after another. And there were still consequences left to come. The weeks that followed did not feel dramatic. They felt administrative, procedural, and irreversible. That was how I knew the damage was real. Once the exhibition closed, the gallery shifted into containment mode. Their legal counsel finalized internal reports, documenting sponsorship discrepancies, authorship concerns, and the consulting payments routed to Lucas. No accusations were framed as emotional or personal. Everything was categorized under compliance, disclosure, and fiduciary responsibility. Those words carried more weight than outrage ever could. Rebecca attempted to contest the findings. She submitted additional statements explaining the collaborative nature of the work and the informal role Lucas played. The problem was not that collaboration existed. The problem was that it had been hidden while money and credit were presented as clean and independent. That distinction mattered to institutions that lived or died by trust. The gallery issued a final notice. The exhibition was formally terminated due to unresolved ethical concerns. Future collaboration was suspended indefinitely. The language was careful. It did not accuse. It did not forgive either. Collectors who had expressed interest withdrew fully. A few requested written confirmation that no sales had been finalized. The gallery complied. No refunds were necessary. The work returned to storage, unsold, and uncelebrated it. Rebecca lost representation quietly. Her agent did not issue a statement. He simply stopped responding. In the art world, silence is not neutral. It is definitive. Lucas resurfaced briefly, attempting to position himself as the true victim. He sent emails asserting that his intellectual contributions had been erased. Those messages were forwarded to legal counsel and answered once, formally, with a request for documentation. None was provided. After that, the emails stopped. The consulting fees paid to Lucas became the focus of financial recovery efforts. The gallery determined that those payments had been misrepresented within the sponsorship structure. Because my funds had been used without informed consent, I was entitled to partial reimbursement. The process was slow, negotiated, and unglamorous. Eventually, a settlement was reached. It did not return everything I had spent. It returned enough to confirm that I had not imagined the misuse. Rebecca contested the settlement initially. When she realized the alternative involved litigation and sworn testimony, she withdrew her objection. Her social circle contracted rapidly. Invitations stopped arriving. Conversations ended sooner than expected. People who had once praised her ambition now spoke cautiously, if at all. No one openly condemned her. They simply adjusted their distance. I did not celebrate any of this. The outcome did not feel like victory. It felt like closure enforced by reality rather than intention. Professionally, I was cleared of any wrongdoing early in the process. Documentation established that my role had been financial, not managerial. The gallery confirmed this privately to relevant parties. That confirmation mattered. It ensured that my name did not become shorthand for controversy. Personally, the silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation ever had. The apartment still held traces of a life that had been planned and dismantled in weeks. Shared objects lost context. Conversations that once felt foundational now felt like rehearsals for deception. Rebecca reached out one final time, weeks after the settlement concluded. She asked to talk, not to reconcile, but to explain. She said she wanted me to understand her choices. I declined. Understanding was no longer necessary. The consequences spoke clearly enough. I learned later that she relocated to a smaller city, one without immediate memory of the exhibition. She attempted to restart quietly, reframing her narrative. Some people accepted it. Many did not ask. That was as much success as she managed. Lucas disappeared from professional circles entirely. Whether by choice or exclusion, I never found out. The absence itself was the outcome. As for me, the aftermath forced a recalibration I had avoided for years. I examined the way I equated support with loyalty and loyalty with silence. I understood now how easily generosity could be mistaken for invisibility when not paired with boundaries. The night of the exhibition became something I rarely spoke about. When I did, I described it factually. I avoided metaphor. I avoided emotion. Not because it no longer mattered, but because it no longer required interpretation. What stayed with me was the precision of it all. The betrayal had not been impulsive. It had been placed, timed, framed, and once revealed, it collapsed under its own structure. The consequences were not explosive. They were cumulative. Each decision led logically to the next, until the outcome became unavoidable. I did not explode in the way people imagine. I did not shout down a room or demand apologies. I simply stopped participating in a narrative that required my silence to function. That was enough.
It was like, well, we should just call ourselves the burnouts.
FIO, figure it out.
Yes.
It's one of my mottos, actually. Just making it work. Instead of an MBA, an MIO.
I love that so much.
Figure it out. Figure it out, which has been the kind of the theme of my life. I've had so many different chapters in my life.